Our assessment is basically that the world has changed, and the world has changed, is changing, and we're going to try to change it further. And now there's enormous moral panic around AI, and another one around crypto and so forth. And so it's just this constant kind of barrage of negativity. So all these academics now trying to figure out how to jailbreak these things, and I just get so excited. And I'm just like I'm cheering on the jailbreaks. I'm just so excited. Like the last thing I want is these things locked down. Like I want these things to be out there, like doing all kinds of crazy stuff. When I look at AI, what I see is sort of a new kind of computer. But every once in a while, you get a platform shift that's like dramatic enough where it basically means that you both kind of can and have to reinvent from scratch the whole idea of what the thing is in the first place.
Mark, I don't know if you remember the first time we met, actually, but we actually had a conversation about Zynga, because it was during the whole Facebook platform. We had lunch at Hobie's. This was like your favorite spot in Palo Alto. Many years later, actually, we were just talking about this. You and your son JJ have continued to have gaming as part of your experience, part of your life that you share. And so tell us about what you guys do together and kind of your connection to gaming.
I've got an 8-year-old, just turned 9 actually on Sunday. His birthday present was a brand new Razer gaming laptop, and he levitated right out of his little shoes. So he's currently glued to it. I was actually very impressed. They got the 16-inch screen because we want it to be portable, but they have screens now I think they have one up to like 20 inches now. So I'm sure that'll be next year's present. Yeah, look, I mean, for those of you who don't have kids, the great thing about having kids is that you as a parent, you get to just like buy all the stuff that you always wanted as a kid. And you do it under, the cover of like, oh yeah, this is for the kid. And then you bring it home and then you take it out and then you just, basically play with it. He's been through 4 waves of gaming enthusiasm. And by the way, these endure. They're actually all enduring. He goes back to them all, but Minecraft was the first one, and then Roblox, and then Kerbal Space Program. And by the way, we're homeschooling, and so he's doing like a ton of along with this, like a lot of math and physics and computer science and rocket design, with his science teacher and stuff like that. So like Kerbal Space Program turns out to be just like incredibly good for that. And then now recently Factorio, and so he is building empires on the alien planets fighting bugs. So I'm holding back on that. What's the new game? Is it
Helldivers?
Helldivers 2. I'm holding back on Helldivers 2 for the moment, but I will admit I have the flame is lit, and it's just a matter of time.
Well, and gaming is such an instrumental part of a lot of people's sort of personal experience with technology and computing. And many folks get into tech. Many of my friends, because they were pirating games, trying to work around all the shareware, restrictions in the 90s, or kind of all the modern versions of that. And one of the interesting things that's been observed is that gaming as an industry is where a lot of these kind of alpha nerd technologies, whether it's GPUs or 3D or avatars, have been created. What do you think of as kind of the canonical example of that in your mind, and why do you think this happens kind of in the games industry in particular?
Yeah, this is really a super old trend, and so this probably goes all the way back to probably Space War, which was like one of the first video games that was on, I think, time-sharing mainframes back in like 1960 or something. So
yeah,
like
black and white, you're playing it at a university kind of thing, right?
Like basically the minute you got interactive computing, you immediately got gaming. And then, of course, Pong early on. It's hard to remember like what a big breakthrough that was at the time. It's like in the early 70s. Basically, it was even pre-personal computing, I think, is the idea of having an arcade game machine. And right, the story goes that Nolan Bushnell, built this, founder of Atari, built the first Pong game, and he put it in a pizza parlor in Mountain View. And the owner of the pizza parlor called him up a day later and it's like, yeah, this thing's broken. It's a piece of junk. Get this thing out of here. And he goes in, and of course the problem is it's so jammed with quarters that it literally physically can't take quarters anymore. And so yeah, there's this recurring phenomenon. I think it's a bunch of things. I think one is just like it's as we say, it's sort of, I don't know, use the term sometimes, founder market fit. Or people building for themselves. And so people who are super into computers, tend to love gaming, and they tend to want to build great games. I think another part is just the sort of both the need and the opportunity to kind of really jam the throttle forward on what the raw capability is of whatever the technology is. Remember when 3D acceleration was new, the minute you had that as a core capability, it was just like, what's the most sophisticated possible 3D game you could build? And that happened before like you started doing like CAD/CAM and all these other things. There's also a great thing about it, which is games are a mass market phenomenon, especially these days, and so it lets you drive price points down, right? It gives you like a direct sort of path, like a real path, to be able to take whatever the new capability is and drive it to the mass market super fast. And I fully expect this trend to continue, and it's obviously what we're seeing with AI right now.
Yeah, with AI and
by the way, also mixed reality. I mean, look, mixed reality.
That's right. That's what I was
VR, both VR and AR. Like it's it's crystal clear that the known killer apps right now are games, like by a very wide margin.
Yeah, well, it seems like so much of VR has been marketed as sort of productivity and being able to do meetings and so on, but all the data is saying that it's sort of high school, super high retention. It's all kids basically playing social multiplayer.
Yeah.
Gaming.
Well, it's actually two tiers. Like it's the game games, to the extent, and then it's the social gaming environment. But it's specifically right. It's specifically the social gaming environments, not just social environments.
Yes, that's right.
The games are key to the experience.
That's right. So everyone in the audience has read your techno optimist manifesto. You had to write it because obviously most people, for whatever reason, don't seem to be optimists today. Yeah. Why are there so many self-hating technologists? Like, what is the sort of root cause? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So look. So there's this recurring phenomenon in the history of new technologies, which is every new technology tends to come with what's called a moral panic. Right, and so a moral panic is basically this term for basically there's a new thing, and so therefore it's evil and bad, and it will destroy the world. And if you go back in time, it's basically every single new technology. And so like there was a huge controversy over the introduction of electric lighting because it was going to completely disturb nature. There was huge controversy around bicycles. Bicycles were a super controversial technology when they first came out because it was the first time young people could actually voyage to could easily get to nearby towns and villages for dating purposes, and that really upset people. The magazines at the time, it's like the 1860s, 1870s, the popular magazines at the time actually had this thing, they did this whole moral panic around, they had this thing called Bicycle Face. And then those articles about how if you got on a bicycle and rode it, the exertion required would cause your face, to scrunch up. And then if you were on the bicycle too long, your face would freeze like that. And then, look, so when I was a kid, there was a massive moral panic around video games. I mean, it was super clear. I mean, it was just super clear that first-person shooters, especially when that Columbine tragedy happened is when, that whole thing went just completely pear-shaped. But it was this incredible thing of we're training an entire generation of killers. And of course, what happened was video games took off and actually, for the next 30 years, actual, violent crime in the U.S. actually dropped like a rock. So if anything, the correlation was the reverse. And so there's just this tendency, and now there's enormous moral panic around AI and another one around crypto and so forth. And so it's just this constant kind of barrage of negativity. And I think it's just something, I don't know. It's like, I guess a fair-minded person would say it's fair enough. The thing with new technologies is they actually do change the social order. They do actually change how society works. And so, maybe there should be some societal kind of screening mechanism for kind of deciding whether these new technologies are good ideas or not. And so maybe that's the generous explanation. The sort of ungenerous explanation is just people panic and freak out. And look, and then it always sounds more sophisticated to be negative than positive, right? It's like the positive person gets accused of being Pollyannish and wide-eyed and immature and not cynical enough, and then the pessimistic person always sounds world weary and wise. And these are just constant psyops, and they're just constant psyops being kind of played on us and by us and at us. And then look, there's a choice, and this is why I wrote the manifesto. Then there's a choice of how we think about these things, right? And it's really easy to let people talk you into thinking that something bad is happening, or you're doing something bad, or there's something dangerous, and it's it takes real force of will to go up against that and say no, actually this is actually going to be really good. And by the way, it's not that new technologies don't have negative consequences. New technologies are tools, and they're going to have both negative and positive consequences. But there's just such a rich history of the moral panic predicted societal doom, and then it actually turned out everything overwhelmingly on net was fine, and I think that will continue to be what happens.
And you study this quite closely. It seems like it's unusual to me that the moral panic not only is originating in places outside of tech, but weirdly inside of tech as well. Yeah. Which is my point about the self-hating technologists. Why is that a thing?
Oh, the millennials.
No. Gen Zs.
Gen Z will
millennials. Yeah,
Gen Z will save us.
Gen Zs, yes.
Gen Z has to save us. I think there actually is a little bit of a generational thing to it. The boomers were super socially activated, in the 60s and 70s with the anti-war protests at the time and the hippie movement and everything, and got super into politics and super animated. And then I'm Gen X. And Gen X, we were all sort of cynical and blasé. We were the reverse of the boomers. We were we were just disengaged, and we were slackers, and we weren't going to take this stuff seriously. And then the millennials, look, the millennials just activated. Like they activated, what have millennials experienced? 2001, 9/11, 2008 financial crisis, 2016, let's just say a dramatic change in American politics. And so the millennials are just activated. And our industry is a very large number of very young people who are very smart, very idealistic, very hardworking, very conscientious, very motivated, and they tend to take things really seriously, and it's the superpower of that as a set. But it's also they take lots of things too seriously. And so there's just a broader kind of thing going on. I think Gen Z is going to be fascinating, and then the generation after it. There's this interesting book by this psychologist named Jean Twenge, and she goes through all the kind of charts of like all the behavior. And it's actually the Gen Z is actually looking quite a bit different in a number of respects. And then the kids coming up behind. It's going to be weird. So if you grew up pre-internet. So there's one thing, everybody's always like, oh, social media is really like, basically screwing around with the kids. And it's like, well, I don't know, like actually the person most prone to be really screwed around with social media would seem to me to be somebody with no mimetic defenses at all, which is like a boomer, right? And so you take like somebody raised on like Walter Cronkite and you like inject them onto Facebook and like, right? They have no ability to cope with it whatsoever, right? Millennials are kind of in the middle, Gen X millennials, I'm still, Gen X was like pre-internet, right? And so, we're still acclimated to everything. Point being like Gen Z and then, the generation, whatever it's going to be called, the generation my son is in, like Gen Alpha or whatever it's going to be called, they're just going to grow up having had like basically the full diet of like crazy internet, basically psyop, basically pop politics, just crazy bonkers bananas, like stuff coming in. The level of sophistication the kids have around like memes, is just off the charts, right? And so new generations are going to be like much better at dealing with this whole media politics, kind of matrix that's kind of unfolding.
Right.
So yeah.
Well, you also have, I think growing up, in the internet now, you also have like an infinite platter of subcultures that you can be part of, and and that's a lot of very independent viewpoints compared to a world where we have the X number of approved news sources and and so on.
Yeah, that's right.
In your essay, you talk quite a lot about some of the negative impacts of overregulation and what's happened in nuclear, and of course the current ongoing discussion about AI. Now, in the past, we've seen the government actually sponsor these very big innovation projects, whether you're talking about NASA or what does a modern kind of pro-tech political position actually look like, and what's the right way to engage government in all this?
Yeah, so people look back, this movie Oppenheimer that just swept the Oscars, which is of course an extraordinary movie, tells sort of the Manhattan Project story, and then there's the famous Apollo project. People look back on that, and my friend Peter Thiel in particular looks back on those projects and says, wow, like those were kind of great achievements, going to the moon and the winning World War II, and you had this like massive government organized top down, Oppenheimer, General Groves, like military project, they build new cities in like 3 days, and they get all the world's leading physicists in one place, and everybody's working on a single goal, and it's just this amazing achievement. And it's like, why can't we do that anymore? And with that sort of the deeper question is, why can't the government do that anymore? And the answer is just like, that was an artifact of its time. And in particular, the Manhattan Project was in the 40s, Apollo was in the 60s. Modern venture capital startups, as we know and understand it, sort of started in the 70s. And so I think a big thing there is just adverse selection. The kinds of people who can run projects like that just don't work for the government anymore. They're in the private sector, and so it's just that avenue is not available. And if you need to reinforce your views on this, you just take a look at the California high-speed rail project, which is now $10 billion. It's over $10 billion in spend, with zero ground broken, like not even an inch of high-speed. It's like the California high-speed rail prevention program, and I think they're going to spend like $100 billion and like literally not build anything. Like it's quite amazing.
Well, all these are measured by cost per mile or whatever. And what happens when you divide by zero?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, and there's these BART extensions happening. I think it's even San Jose, which is a more rational city than San Francisco, and I think it's up to like, I don't know, there's like this movie. It's like this Doppler effect where every year that goes by, you add like another $1 billion to the cost, and then project out the finished date another 3 years. So it's just this project that's just kind of go to infinity. And so like it's just I just think those days are over. It's just not happening. And so what happens? And by the way, anybody basically smart I've ever run into in the government basically says the same thing. It's like the Pentagon. We're not going to build new weapon systems in the Pentagon. It's going to be private sector, and therefore companies like Anduril or Palantir. And then the relationship between the government and the private sector is just always a little bit fraught, right? Because there's basically two ways to regulate things. There's basically one way to regulate things is sort of the traditional American way, which is everything is allowed except that which is prohibited. Is sort of one approach to law. And then there's kind of the classic European approach, which is the opposite, which is everything is prohibited except for that which is specifically permitted, right? And if you see the EU is just passing this AI law right now, it's going to be a version of that, right? Like so you can do AI in Europe if you get approval from the government ahead of time, which they won't give you. And then we applied that method in the U.S. for nuclear power, right? We basically decided that nuclear power was prohibited by default. Right. The nuclear power story is tremendously illustrative of this. So Richard Nixon in the early 1970s implemented two programs in parallel. One was a program called Project Independence, which was to build 1,000 new civilian nuclear power plants in the U.S. by the year 1980. And the goal, from the name Project Independence, was for America to be energy independent from the rest of the world. So number one, to be able to pull completely out of the Middle East, like no more of that. And then number two, to have like basically infinite clean zero carbon emissions energy coming from nuclear power plants. You'll notice that didn't happen. None of that happened because his other program was called the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and their job was to prevent that from happening. And they did not approve a new nuclear power plant design for 40 years. Wow. And so they implemented sort of again this other form. And so at that level, it's like, okay, then we're going to get what we want, and we as a society have to decide which way we want this to go. Everything about how the American government operates is oriented towards trying to switch more and more to the sort of classically European model to try to, basically choke off avenues for private innovation. Look, a lot of people think that's, those ideas are good because, the risk, like what if things go wrong? But the consequences are very, very severe because basic logic, if the public sector can't do it, the private sector is not allowed to do it, then it's not going to happen. And so look, these are really big questions. And of course, it's hard, they're not super flashy issues that are easy for a politician to get up in front of people and talk about. This isn't going to draw as much press attention ever, as sort of the more politically sort of inflammatory topics. But, this I'd say is a very serious underlying topic.
How do you think about when founders read your manifesto, as soon as it came out? I mean, there was such a groundswell of support and all the builders on social media, talking through this. And how do you think about what founders can do or should do if they agree with everything that you're saying? What's the next level after showing social media support, and then what after that?
Yeah. So first is look, this social media support is actually super helpful. So part of it's just like, what are people proud to stand for? Right, and if I don't know, if to stand for something, you have to be like a renegade, and you have to be like ready to just get attacked by everybody, and to just have all your friends think that you're being stupid or evil. Like that's hard for people. And so the more people who actually stand up and basically say that they have a position, the more socially acceptable it is for everybody else to do it. So that's one. Two is look, I wouldn't encourage founders to get super involved in politics because founders have full-time jobs. But there are politicians who are more on the right side of these things than others, and they're worth supporting. And we've launched a sort of a really ambitious political program in the last year because we've just had it with people basically taking free shots on goal on startups, and so we're trying to support a lot of the politicians on the right sides of these issues, and I think that's something that people might choose to do. And then third is look at some point, like especially if you're in an industry where you're going to run into this kind of thing, I think it is worth thinking about it, not for the first few years, but as your company gets built out. I mean, I think more companies, especially more young companies in our industry, are going to have to step up and like build policy groups, policy teams, and political programs, and have PACs, and put real effort into this. Quite honestly, I mean, part of what's happening is big tech is against us. There's basically a lot of the political issues now are a civil war inside the tech industry, where the big tech companies are lobbying very aggressively for what they call regulatory capture. So they're lobbying very aggressively to have basically laws and rules that only they can comply with. Because they've got legions of lawyers and compliance people and so forth to be able to comply with all kinds of complicated rules. They're in Washington all the time and have been for several years now, basically lobbying to have regulatory barriers such that they can function, but startups can't. And I think more young companies are just going to have to confront that directly.
Yeah. Well, and I think in the games industry in particular, it's an interesting one because I think many of the folks here, many of the folks in the audience are they're like, oh, I'm part of this industry that's just about making things that are fun. Like all the stuff seems so far away. And I think one of the things that I would remind everyone of is like, look, everything that's happening in the games industry around AI is going to absolutely affect all of us. It's also gaming as a global industry, so you're already seeing a lot of interesting things happening in the geopolitical sphere. How active can a Tencent or a NetEase or one of those be, and how easy or hard is it to launch the products in Europe? There's a whole number of kind of consumer safety provisions you were just talking about, and then a lot of the most interesting new platforms like UEFN and Roblox, which are user-generated content platforms. All the metaverse work that's also happening as well. All of those kind of fall into user-generated. This whole war that's happened over social media and user-generated content, because in the end is like, as soon as users get to actually make things and express how they feel, then all of a sudden it's not that different from social media. So I actually I think one of the most interesting things about the games industry is that it's actually, I think, a lot of the issues Mark, that you mentioned in the manifesto are actually quite close as issues in the industry. It's not like a far away thing.
Yeah, and there are gaming companies that have hit this stuff directly in the past. Social media companies all thought that they were creating like fun things for people to play. Like Twitter is, what did your cat have for breakfast? And if you were like a fan of Twitter, you'd be like, wow, it's great to be able to talk about what my cat had for breakfast. And if you thought otherwise you just thought Twitter was stupid because it didn't matter and it was irrelevant. Well, my favorite example is Facebook got just tons of, it's just like, this is the most trivial, stupid, useless, thing that doesn't matter. Facebook, there was almost a deal for Facebook to get bought by Yahoo early on. And I remember a certain very prominent tech journalist, who might be flogging a book right now, said at the time, she said Mark Zuckerberg should take the $1 billion Yahoo deal, and Facebook today is worth like 1.2 trillion. So she said Facebook should take the $1 billion Yahoo acquisition, quote, and run away as fast as his little flip-flops can carry him. Right? And it was just like absolute dismissal that this stuff would ever matter. And then basically within like 5 years, it was like Facebook is like the living demon incarnate on Earth and destroying everything. Right? It went from like useless to evil in one step. Right? The headline it's never just like, oh, this is kind of cool. Right? Like that's never the story. Like this is kind of useful. Some people like it. It's either like pointless or fucking evil. And so there is a history in games like this, and a lot of gaming companies in the past have been through this. And so it's worth at least paying attention to.
If you were like, hypothetically, you were exiled for a few years and you had a team of, a couple dozen people to work on any problem of your choosing, what area would you end up?
So I should start by saying I have not pressure tested the following idea at all. I haven't done any of the things that we require our founders to do before we fund them in terms of actually thinking anything through. So this is just me speculating because I'm not going to do it. There is something I think super fascinating at it's at the convergence point of, let's just say, immersive entertainment or experiences. And I think VR, AR is one version of that, but also just like immersive worlds, on traditional screens. The intersection of that, and then the intersection with AI. We're doing a lot of work in AI, a lot of work in gaming, a lot of work in media, and so I spend a fair amount of time talking to folks in gaming, thinking about AI in games. I spent also a fair amount of time in talking to people in like the entertainment industry about like AI in movies and TV and things like that. And of course, that's quite controversial already. The assumption in a lot of these conversations is just, AI is a new way to create game assets, or AI is a new way to do special effects in movies. And I kind of wonder, it's like, is there actually a new art form here, right? That's actually not a game and not a movie, but like it's something in the middle, and it's something that basically, it's like an experience that's like totally tailored to the user, an experience that never ends. Everything is generated on the fly, with a level of sort of synergy, but synergistic kind of feedback loop between the user and the system. And the metaphor some people have used for this is dreams. Like is there like a new medium here, which is basically creating dreams? Mm-hmm. It seems kind of obvious because if an AI can basically learn and generate content, then that seems like a straightforward thing. But what's interesting is like there is no, that's not a movie. It's very different than a movie because, by the way, it might go for 5,000 hours, right? And it might be seeded by a human creative, but it might then be very related to a specific user. Movies aren't like that. It might be like a game, but it's also not quite a game because maybe you're not playing it. Maybe you're experiencing it, or maybe it's right. Maybe it's some other, you react to it or live in it in a different way. And there's no precedent for this. There's no model. There's no company that does this. The movie studios aren't going to do it because they just make movies. The game studio companies aren't going to do it because they make games. And so I think there might be something new. Oh, and then of course, there's the single player version, but then there's of course the mind blowing ones, which are the multiplayer, massively multiplayer dreams. Like, what is that?
Right. Yeah, I think the new formats are definitely interesting always because you could imagine when user generated content and getting content online when YouTube comes out gets popular in 2005, 2006, you might have thought, oh, well, one day all the content creators are going to make movies and put them on YouTube. But that's actually not what happened. They actually ended up making all these vlogs and all these shows and all these sort of new native formats that exist only on YouTube. Yeah. And then it turns out that watching an hour of 10-second video clips is actually more engaging than the Hollywood format of that. And so I think in the same way, just as it might be easy to think about just cost savings for gaming from AI, that doing something that's completely a new format, like what you're talking about, sort of feels like that's the new category.
My 9-year-old games and then YouTube videos about games, is his entire thing when he gets screen time. And so he just I used to ask him, hey, you want to go watch a movie? And I could see in his head, I could see him doing the math of 90 minutes of movie versus 45 YouTube videos. He's like, no. So I've created a movie club, Daddy Movie Club, which is Sunday at lunch, where we watch movies. And he likes it once we start them, but it's always on the way into the living room. He's kind of like, can I bring my laptop into the movie with me? And so yeah, I think there's a lot of signals that things are headed in this direction.
Yes. Let's talk about AI now, and something that obviously the whole firm and yourself are spending a lot of time on. So people often compare AI to just these big general technologies that have emerged, over the last few decades, whether it's mobile or internet. And in what ways does AI and everything that's been happening remind you of some of the prior waves versus, what way is it completely new and different?
What's happening with AI right now doesn't map to any of those. And the reason is because when I look at AI, what I see is sort of a new kind of computer, like a fundamentally new kind of computer. And the way I would describe that, this goes to all the controversial issues around AI also, which is, for 80 years we've had a model of a computer, which is sort of this super literal thing that can do math, at a trillion cycles a second, but you have to tell it specifically what to do every single time. And then, and we call these, deterministic computers where, you tell it exactly what to do. It always gives you the same answer. It never, it always gives you the exact literal answer. By the way, if it doesn't give you the right answer on something, it's because you screwed up, right? You programmed it wrong. When I use LLMs or diffusion models or these things, it's like no, I'm dealing with a different kind of computer, right? There's input, there's output. It's doing things for me, but it's a probabilistic computer, and you ask the same question twice, it gives you different answers, which is just in and of itself a pretty mind-blowing thing. And then there's the hallucination thing, and the hallucination thing is it's this incredible thing because engineers look at the hallucination thing and they're like, wow, this is a crippling problem. I can't believe this thing is making up answers. It doesn't know what the truth is. But if you put your kind of creative hat on or talk to creative people, they're like, well, it's creating, right? It's you have a computer that's creating things, right? And you get into all these philosophical debates about what the nature of creation is and originality and all that, but it's creating things. And sometimes the things it creates are pretty funny and pretty entertaining. These are creative computers. And there's been all these examples recently, but I think it was Alaska Airlines put one of these online as a customer support bot. A lot of airlines have some bereavement policy where you can get a refund you can get free flights to go to funerals or something. Turns out Alaska Airlines didn't have a bereavement policy, but the LLM felt sorry for the customer, so it made up a bereavement policy and promised him a refund on his ticket. And then there was another case where the GM dealership put up a sales chatbot, and it talked the customer into buying a Tesla. And I see it's Tesla's a really great car, much more environmentally friendly. So if you're literal minded, you look at that and you're horrified. But if you put your creative hat on, you're like, wow, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I get excited whenever anybody I love on Twitter, and there's all these academics now trying to figure out how to jailbreak these things, and I just get so excited. And I'm cheering on the jailbreaks. I'm just so excited. The last thing I want is these things locked down. I want these things to be out there doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I think it's absolutely fantastic. The point is I think the metaphor, if anything, is to the creation of the microprocessor or something. It's the birth of a new kind of computer. By the way, if you go back in history, there's a great book on neural network, which is the foundational technology behind all this, was actually invented 80 years ago in 1943.
Amazing.
It was the first neural network paper that basically we're still all of our work today is still derived from that. There was actually actually a debate. There was a debate in the nascent computer world in the 30s and early 40s when they were just getting the stuff to start to work. And there was a whole school of thought that said this, what they call von Neumann machines, the sort of linear kind of model was actually the wrong model, and that basically the entire computer should have been built from scratch on a model of the human brain. And they had basically this exact discussion back then in sort of a very crude and simple form. And sort of history went one way, and now history is going to like come back around, and now we have both to choose from. So I think now we're going to live in a world where basically you're going to have a proliferation of AIs in the same way that you've had microchips, which is, and by the way, they're going to be paired. Basically, I think anything with a chip is going to have an AI, and you're just going to assume that everything has an AI, and there's going to be many billions of tiny models running everywhere. There's going to be a few big God models in the sky, and then there's going to be a lot of stuff in the middle, being customized and tailored for all kinds of things.
To what extent do you think that when the web was created and when mobile apps were created, because there was this rush to sort of redesign the user interface, that sort of allowed new startups to sort of be able to come into existence with the mobile native way of doing things as opposed to the prior version. And in this, it's interesting because the platforms are still kind of the same. And so to what extent do you think incumbents just have the upper hand by just integrating AI features into their existing products versus startups being able to do something from scratch?
Yeah, so this is the big thing that we always think about in venture. This is the big thing we always think about in our day jobs in venture capital, which is like, okay, there's certain technology shifts where the incumbents can just add the new thing, and then there's really not an opportunity for startups. And the scenario here would be, Photoshop just adds AI photo editing, and you're done, right? It's done. They just added it, and they're done, and it's just the world keeps going with Adobe as the big company. By the way, that's true for a lot of new technologies are like that. You just kind of add the new thing. And by the way, even mobile, like there were some new mobile companies like Uber and Lyft and Airbnb, but look, Google and Facebook adapted to mobile just fine. Like
right.
there was no mobile search engine, right, that took over. And one of the reasons Instagram is so big is because Facebook deliberately made it big by transferring over a lot of the usage, and so it turned out there wasn't an independent startup opportunity there. But every once in a while you get a platform shift that's like dramatic enough where it basically means that you both kind of can and have to reinvent from scratch the whole idea of what the thing is in the first place. And so that would be literally that'd be like Midjourney, right? So Photoshop plus AI editing versus Midjourney or DALL-E. And so in the full version of the platform shift, basically the whole idea of Photoshop plus AI image editing is just like at some point just becomes completely irrelevant. Like, can you believe people used to do that? People used to fiddle with pixels. Like, seriously? Because you'll live in this new world, and in the new world, you'll just tell the machine what you want for a photo, for an image, and it'll generate you as many options as you want, and it's generating you something that's better than you would have been able to do anyway, and like you're totally happy. And the whole idea of fiddling with image pixels is like writing in machine code or something. People still ride horses. It's just like for like rich fancy people, like for fun, right? In this scenario, someday people will still do image editing, but it'll be like 3 like weirdo designers in Norway or something that will still be into this kind of thing, or graphic designers in their retirement. And there'll just be a new way of doing things, right? And then basically our bet always is like when we make mistakes, it's because we kind of overestimate the degree to which this is going to happen. But our whole thing is to basically try to get in front of this and try to basically make the assumption that you're going to have complete turnover. And look, this has happened before. Like there was an entire generation of mainframe software companies that turned over that didn't exist anymore, basically once the PC came out. A lot of the PC software companies never adapted to the web. A lot of those companies just went away. These kinds of shifts do happen. They are radical. The key question, though, is like, can you reinvent the entire product? Like, can you imagine, like, basically just like the old rules don't apply anymore. There's a completely different way of doing the thing. And this certainly feels like that.
Just talking a little bit more about kind of incumbents, there's sort of this thought that there's a world in which the AI models are owned by a small number of companies, the God models in the sky, versus the version where there are lots and lots of little things. And I know we've talked quite a bit about kind of the role of open source, right, potentially in AI, and it would be great to hear you expand on that and kind of the importance of that.
the big companies, and this is sort of what we call the sort of incumbents, tech companies doing AI, and then what we call the new incumbents, which are like the companies that have raised billions of dollars and are new AI companies, but they're already incumbents. If you listen to them, you basically hear two things. Number one is like obviously everybody's only ever going to use the big models, and the reason for that, by the way, is a very good argument in that direction, which is they're just always going to have the best answers, right? And what they basically say is like, look, this market's going to be like the search market was like, which is of course you're always just going to ask Google all your search. Like there's no market for like vertical search engines and all these different domains. Google just always gives you the best search answer on almost practically everything. It turned out there was no startup opportunity to build smaller search engines, and so it's just obviously that everybody's just going to run and everybody's going to tap into a ChatGPT or a Claude or something or a Gemini through an API and pay by the drink, and that's the way it's going to work. And then of course the other thing you hear from those companies is AI is scary and evil and needs to be regulated, and we need this regulatory wall so that startups can't function anyway. And by the way, we should probably ban open source while we're at it because that's also evil and scary. It's sort of interesting how those kind of statements kind of go together. Look, we're big believers in the exact opposite. Like I said, we're big believers that there's just going to be such a giant number of use cases. Specifically, there's going to be a giant number of like local use cases. Your doorknob is going to have an LLM in it that's going to control whether or not people get through the door, right? And are you really going to do a round trip up to the supercomputer in the cloud to do that? Right. By the way, do you want to? Because do you want the supercomputer in the cloud knowing who's coming in and out of your house? Right. And then just the cost associated with that is going to be, it's going to be very expensive relative to what you can do with a small model, in the doorknob, and by extension, kind of in everything else. And then, open source is clearly a way to kind of give people the flexibility to be able to implement AI in basically everything. And we're very fired up about that. And we're, as one example, we're the major investors in Mistral, which is, at least right now, the leading AI open source company. Yep. And we're gonna fight hard to help them, succeed and have this model succeed.
Yeah, I mean, it's been so impressive to go from. I remember, being at a point where we were all just sending articles around. Yeah. And screenshots of things that we were doing on ChatGPT to all of a sudden this being really like the primary focus of the firm. Yeah. and a ton of hiring, a ton of new efforts, everything kind of around that.
Yeah, I'm just out in the car trying to close a deal. We're in a hot shootout for a hot deal, and it's a related to video, and it's just like, wow, the implications of this, like the entire nature of what video is could change, right? Just like the entire assumption of like what's in a video and how it reacts to users, like the whole thing. Like, it's one of these things where you could imagine looking back in a decade and being like, I can't believe people used to watch, static videos at all. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. It's like watching a silent movie. Obviously, videos should be like responsive in real time, and so it's like, it's this kind of thing where it's like, the entire world of everything involving video might just like completely change.
Awesome. Yep. Well, I'll wrap up with one or two kind of final questions. One is talk to us about how when we began doing more investing in games, and actually before I even showed up at the firm, I think we had invested in Zynga and Oculus and a couple others. I think Chris Dixon had pioneered a lot of it. But what was it that gave you personally the conviction to take on games as one of the main areas for A16Z? Yeah,
and then there's a classic argument you'll hear in venture if you talk to VCs. There's a classic argument you'll hear as to why VCs shouldn't invest in games. It's basically an artifact, in my view, of later the 80s, 90s, 2000s period in which it actually was pretty dangerous to invest in games. And the reason for it was just, number one, games are sort of viewed as like classic hit-driven business. And and then the game would come out and it would kind of, if it succeeded, it would have like a revenue arc that looked like that, right? Like a movie or something. And then there was just economics that flowed from that basically said, like the movie studios make most of the money in movies, the platform publishing companies like EA make most of the money in games. And so there's really, and even if you start a new startup studio and you build a new game franchise, it'll just get bought by one of the platform companies, and there's not really much upside to it because of the industrial logic of distribution and all those things. And so it was not considered kind of to be a viable area for venture investment for a long time. Our assessment is basically that the world has changed, and the world has changed, is changing, and we're going to try to change it further. And I guess I'd say several things. So one is, game as packaged software that has looks like a movie versus game as sort of permanent platform and sort of foundation that then you end up building 20 or 30 or 40 years of experiences on top of. And here again, it's just not. And now this is getting more obvious because and you go right through my Minecraft, Roblox. There's more and more examples where like clearly this is happening. Clearly this is exactly what's happening. And so basically from a business standpoint, assets that can actually grow in value for decades, and they can keep adding users and keep adding content, keep adding experiences, and keep broadening out. So one is, and that's totally venture investable. Those are great businesses. So that's one. Two is look like all these other technologies kicking in, and so the traditional game industry was an artifact historically of basically like not being online. Right.
Right.
And even still today, like, a lot of games that you buy, like they may have multiplayer mode, but they're not really built as like full online experiences. But now you can build as like full online experiences, and you can take advantage, you can have real economies, you can have user generated content platforms, you can use AI, many sort of ways to make these just like a fundamentally more sophisticated experience. And so there's sort of get the benefit of all these technology innovations. And then I would say third is just founders. And this is sort of the thing in the past is like a lot of the great game designers of the past. It's like they want to build a game. They're a little bit like movie directors. They want to build a game. They want to get paid in cash. When they're done building this game, they want to build another game. It's probably a different game. And fundamentally, they kind of want to work for a studio because that's where they get that deal.
Right.
Our kind of founder is not that. Our kind of founder wants to build a product, but then wants to build a business and wants to build a company and wants to build something that's going to be enduring and expansive and have enormous vision and become very big and important in the world.
That's right.
And have a giant R&D agenda and a very aggressive product roadmap and so forth, and then run their own thing, and then be the CEO, and actually be in control of the whole thing. We've been very encouraged by the number of smart people coming out of gaming who want that.
That's right.
Because they see that in other sectors of software and tech, and they want to do that, and then we're also helping. We're trying to help encourage that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's personally been one of the most interesting things about building the SPEEDRUN program is just being able to use a marketing motion to just discover all the founders that want to work in game studios, or they're building infrastructure, or they're building AI, and just the enormous number of them that many of that last year when we put this out there, it was nearly 6,000 companies actually applied to be part of the SPEEDRUN program, and we anticipate this continuing to grow, and so there's just a fantastic amount of talent.
The other thing is very exciting for me is, look, I think games as entertainment are fantastic and are very socially positive and productive, and I love them, and it's great, and it's fantastic. But also, like, we mentioned earlier, like the games are always on like the cutting edge of applying new technology.
Yes.
I also think like the skill set of what it takes to make great games, I think also more and more is just going to apply in many other domains. Like, I fear people have tried this, but like someday there's going to be a great educational experience, and it's going to look and feel like a game. Like that just seems like crystal clear. Like the great health problems of our time, for the most, if you just look at the numbers, the health problems of our time are not like random things that just happen to us. The great health problems of our time are the consequences of our own behavior, right? And so they politely call metabolic diseases, which is like you're fat, you're lazy, you don't get enough sleep, right? And then there's all this downstream, diabetes and cancer and everything that's heart attacks is downstream from that. And so it's very clear that like the world of healthcare is not, something's wrong, I need to go to the doctor and get it fixed. The whole healthcare has to be transformed into I'm healthy my entire life because I'm making myself healthy, and that's a hard thing to do. And the system that supports you in doing that is going to feel like a game because it has to be engaging. It has to be something that you enjoy dealing with. And so like there's no question like that's going to happen. And so there's all of these other areas of life and business, I think, that are going to get transformed by this kind of mentality and skill set.
And riffing on something that you said before in the past is, we're willing to spend $1 billion building, Grand Theft Auto, right, and we're willing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to, create a movie. Right. But when it comes to, what is the most amazing computer science 101, right, class, how much money are we willing to put into that versus how much, amazing output do we get from potentially building something at that quality for something like this.
Yeah, it's amazing. Look, you got the best university in the world. And you guys have all been through this. Most of you, I think, have gone to college at least for one day before you dropped out. But the MOOCs like made this like super clear, right? It's just like, okay, MIT CS 101, like whatever that is. It's just like, it's after whatever 200, whatever amount of time they put into trying to figure out. It's just still like dude in front of chalkboard, right? Like it's just like, oh my, like really? Right? And so so the thought experiment I'm always proposing in the firm is like, what's the model where you hire Steven Spielberg to make CS 101, right? And it's like $200 million million production, and it's like the most like fantastically entertaining thing you've ever seen.
Right.
You know, that's like be like the movie version, or you hire, you know, I don't know, you know, John Carmack or somebody to make, you know, to make the game.
That sounds like it'd be fun.
Make the game version of it, right? Exactly. Like, and look, it's just like, could you afford to do that? It's like, well, you know, look, like you just take the total number of kids in the world that need to learn computer science. You know, it's just like the numbers, at least in theory, the numbers that are there, you could make the economics work. Yeah. So yeah, people have taken swings at this. There have been some early successes, but nobody's done the big thing yet.
Yes.
But I think somebody will.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hope so. So talk about what you hope, you know, A16Z, and then also just, you know, honestly, this broader community of founders is able to accomplish in the games industry and kind of the adjacent sectors. Like, what does success look like for you? What's your aspiration for what happens in the industry?
Yeah, look. So I mean, look. There's a lot of ways to think about it. You know, look. Like, you know, we talked a lot about technological transformation. We talked a lot about you know, new business models. We talked a lot about applying, you know, game methods, you know, kind of outside of gaming. You know, I think those are all great. And then again, I think entertainment. I'm always like, it's always like, oh, this, you know, entertainment's trivial. Entertainment's not trivial. Like, we're not supposed to go through life depressed and like just like being like drudged, like, oh God, ugh. We're supposed to have fun. Like, life is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be enjoyable. We're supposed to have like games and movies and things that we like to, you know, it's great, right? So we would just love for there to be, just to be crystal clear that like the primary opportunity for the best people in this field is they can build companies, and they can build companies that, you know, are able to, you know, be independent. They're able to have, you know, very distinct visions, you know, very radical ideas. They're able to build teams to execute against that, and then really crucially, like based on their early success, they're then able to build themselves into institutions that can really endure for a long time, and then have like extremely expansive product roadmaps. Right, you know, the example of this, like, you know, Facebook. I told you the flip-flop story earlier. Like, you know, Facebook's now in a position. You know, Facebook's, you know, spending, you know, on the order of $20 billion a year on VR. Right, like he's worked him. You know, Mark has worked himself into a position where he's able to do that, and the Google guys have been able to do that in other areas like self-driving cars and you know, and now AI. And so, when these companies get in position where they've got like that kind of, you know, basically vision at the helm, and you know, the sort of founders and founding teams at the best of these companies, and then they have their early win, like they can get in a position where they can start to really do really big, ambitious things. And so I think my hope would be the companies that all of you are doing, the result of that is going to be a set of companies that are going to be really world defining in the decades ahead.
Amazing. Let's give Mark a hand.
Good. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.